There's something universally fascinating about stories that challenge our assumptions. They grip us because, deep down, we know how often appearances deceive. We walk through life categorizing people, consciously or not, based on clothes, titles, or the role they play. We assume the man in the expensive suit is the decision maker. We think the person with a mop in hand has little to say in a room full of experts. But every once in a while, a moment shatters those quiet prejudices. A moment that flips the script so entirely that it silences a room. Today, you're about to hear one of those stories. A story where laughter quickly turned to stunned silence. And once you hear it, you might never look at the world or the people in it the same way again. It happened at a prestigious university. A grand hall filled with some of the brightest minds, professors, researchers, and students, all gathered for a special lecture on quantum physics. The air buzzed with anticipation. This wasn't just any lecture. The speaker was a world-renowned physicist flown in from overseas, a pioneer in the field. The auditorium brimmed with intellectual energy. Every seat was taken. Every conversation laced with theories and complex equations. At the back of the room, unnoticed by most, stood a man in a simple janitor's uniform. He was there every day, pushing his cart, mopping the floors, changing the trash. To the crowd, he was invisible, part of the background like the walls or the chairs. But what none of them knew was that this unassuming man was about to change the tone of that entire auditorium. The lecture began. The guest speaker, confident and articulate, explained theories that danced on the edge of human comprehension. Quantum entanglement, the fabric of space-time. The room nodded along, some proudly following, others struggling to keep up, but too proud to admit it. For nearly an hour, complex diagrams filled the screen. Equations, graphs, abstract concepts, most of which floated just above the understanding of the average listener. But everyone smiled, everyone clapped. It was, after all, prestigious to simply be present. And then, as the floor opened for questions, a voice rose from the back. It wasn't the voice of a professor or a student. It wasn't polished or academic. It was the quiet, steady voice of the janitor. And with that, the room's mood shifted. At first, there was laughter. Polite, condescending chuckles from those who believed they already understood the hierarchy of knowledge in the room. The janitor asking a question. Surely, this was a joke. Surely, he misunderstood the complexity of what had been presented. Eyes rolled. Smirks appeared on faces. Even the guest speaker offered a brief, amused smile, expecting the man to ask something elementary, something that would reaffirm the status quo. But then, the janitor spoke his second sentence, and everything changed. The air tightened. The room fell utterly silent. Because in that moment, it became clear, painfully clear, that this man's understanding not only matched, but perhaps even surpassed that of the guest speaker. The question he posed wasn't simplistic. It wasn't even rooted in surface-level understanding. It cut directly to the heart of the lecture's most complex, unresolved problem. It referenced advanced studies, obscure experiments, and paradoxes that only the most dedicated in the field even dared to explore. His phrasing was sharp, his logic flawless. The guest speaker's face shifted amusement, replaced by something else entirely. Recognition. Recognition of an equal, or maybe even a superior. And as the silence deepened, as every mind in the room recalibrated its assumptions, the janitor simply stood there, waiting. Waiting not for validation, but for an answer that for the first time that day, the speaker wasn't entirely prepared to give. There's a certain arrogance that comes with knowledge, or at least with the illusion of it. In lecture halls, boardrooms, or research conferences, those seated at the front, those dressed in tailored suits often believe they've earned not just expertise, but authority over truth itself. It's human nature. We equate appearance with competence. We assume that those who speak with confidence, those with titles or academic accolades, are the only voices worth hearing. But what happens when the person we dismissed as invisible, the person whose role we deemed insignificant, steps forward and reveals a depth of understanding that leaves even the experts speechless? That is precisely what unfolded that day at the university, when the janitor's second sentence changed everything. In that moment, the entire room froze. The same people who had chuckled just seconds before now exchanged confused glances. Their expressions betrayed a shared realization they had underestimated him, and not by a small margin. His question wasn't the naive rambling they expected. It was calculated, precise, rooted in concepts so advanced that some struggled to even follow along. A few professors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Graduate students frantically whispered among themselves, attempting to decipher the implications of what he had just asked. The guest speaker paused, eyes narrowing slightly, as if replaying the words in his mind. It was clear. The janitor had hit a nerve, not with disrespect, but with raw intellectual precision. The question itself revolved around quantum coherence, the fragile state in which particles behave in unison, governed by the bizarre rules of quantum mechanics. Maintaining coherence is one of the greatest challenges in quantum computing. The janitor, however, didn't merely reference the basic principles. He cited a controversial, unpublished study that had circulated in niche academic circles, proposing a method to sustain coherence at room temperature, a concept considered nearly impossible. It wasn't just that he knew about the study. It was the way he dissected its flaws, highlighted its potential, and then, in a few concise sentences, proposed an alternative hypothesis that left even the most seasoned researchers questioning their assumptions. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the projector and the quiet scribble of pens on notepads. The weight of the moment settled over them like a fog. Even those unfamiliar with quantum mechanics could sense that something extraordinary had occurred. It wasn't just about science anymore. It was about shattered expectations, about the uncomfortable realization that brilliance isn't always wrapped in academic robes or accompanied by a polished accent. Sometimes it wears work boots and carries a mop. The speaker cleared his throat, visibly collecting his thoughts. His carefully rehearsed confidence gave way to a rare vulnerability, the vulnerability of a person unexpectedly challenged in their domain of expertise. And yet, to his credit, the speaker did not dismiss the janitor's question. He didn't belittle him or dodge the inquiry. Instead, he did something few expected. He smiled not with amusement this time, but with genuine intrigue, and invited the janitor to elaborate. The invitation itself was a shock to the audience. Whispers rippled across the room. Some glanced toward the janitor with renewed curiosity, others with veiled discomfort. But the janitor, composed and assured, stepped forward. No podium. Number? Slides just his words clear, structured, and quietly authoritative. He outlined his reasoning, building upon well-established theories and seamlessly weaving in obscure studies that most in the room hadn't even heard of as he spoke. A transformation swept through the audience. The skeptical expressions softened. The arms crossed defensively across chests slowly unfolded. Even the professors leaned in, eyes fixed, pens hovering above notebooks. The janitor wasn't just throwing around jargon to impress. He understood the intricacies of the field in a way that demanded attention. It wasn't just his knowledge that captivated them. It was his humility. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak with arrogance or condescension. He simply shared ideas, complex, revolutionary ideas, as if discussing them was the most natural thing in the world. And in that quiet confidence, the audience found something far more compelling than academic prestige. They found authenticity. By the time the janitor concluded his explanation, the atmosphere in the hall had shifted entirely. The boundaries between titles and uniforms, between assumed roles and actual merit had blurred beyond recognition. The applause that followed wasn't the polite, obligatory clapping that typically concludes academic discussions. It was genuine, spontaneous, tinged with respect, and, for many, tinged with a hint of shame. Shame for the laughter. Shame for the assumptions. Shame for the silent hierarchy that had dictated who deserved to speak and who didn't. But the janitor wasn't interested in their apologies, spoken or unspoken. His interest lay elsewhere, in curiosity, in exploration, in the pursuit of understanding that transcends social labels. After the lecture, a small crowd gathered around him. Professors with decades of experience, PhD students on the cusp of their dissertations, journalists eager for a headline-worthy story. They asked questions, sought clarification, even requested references to the obscure studies he had mentioned. The janitor, whose name was revealed to be Marcus Bell, answered each inquiry with calm precision. It turned out that Marcus wasn't merely a custodian. His past told a different story. A brilliant student who, due to family responsibilities and financial hardships, had stepped away from academia before completing his doctorate. Life had led him down an unexpected path, but his passion for learning never dimmed. By day, he cleaned lecture halls. By night, he devoured research papers, attended online seminars, and nurtured the brilliance that circumstance had tried to bury. News of the incident spread quickly across campus. It became a whispered legend, shared in hallways and cafeterias, dissected in classrooms and faculty lounges. For some, it was an embarrassment, a glaring reminder that intellect isn't exclusive to ivory towers. For others, it was inspiring proof that knowledge belongs to those willing to seek it, regardless of where they stand on society's ladder. And for Marcus, it was simply a moment, one that confirmed what he had always believed, that ideas matter more than appearances, and that true learning isn't confined to formal titles or the walls of a university. In the days that followed, invitations poured in. Departments that once overlooked Marcus extended offers to join research groups. Professors invited him to lectures not as a janitor, but as a colleague, as a contributor to discussions he had quietly observed for years. Some extended invitations out of guilt, others out of genuine respect. But Marcus approached them all with the same humility that had defined his life. He wasn't interested in pity or sudden fame. He wasn't driven by the need to prove anyone wrong. His only interest was knowledge and understanding the world, and perhaps helping others do the same. The university administration, aware of the growing media attention, offered to cover the remaining credits needed for him to complete his degree. The offer was generous, symbolic even, but Marcus hesitated. His path, he knew, wasn't about validation from institutions. It was about the love of learning itself, a journey he had walked quietly for years, with or without recognition. Still, after much reflection, he accepted, not for status, but because he understood the doors a formal degree might open. But deep down, he knew that degrees, titles, or credentials didn't define his worth. His value had been clear the moment he spoke his second sentence. The moment knowledge silenced assumptions. The world outside the university soon took notice. Articles appeared in scientific journals and mainstream media alike. Some celebrated the story as a triumph of humility over ego. Others debated its implications, questioning the rigid structures of academia that had allowed such brilliance to go unnoticed. Online forums buzzed with discussion. Some skeptics suggested the story was exaggerated. But those present that day knew better. They had witnessed the transformation firsthand. They had seen a room full of experts, silenced not by intimidation or credentials, but by the quiet, undeniable authority of knowledge well earned. Years later, the story of Marcus Bell remains more than just an inspiring anecdote. It's a lesson, a reminder etched into the culture of that university and beyond. His face never adorned billboards. He never sought fame or fortune. Instead, his legacy grew quietly, rooted in the hearts of those who heard him speak and, more importantly, in the minds he challenged to think differently. Students often retell the story to newcomers, the tale of how a janitor walked into a lecture, shattered expectations, and left behind a blueprint for humility and intellectual courage. And yet, perhaps the most profound impact Marcus had wasn't limited to academia. His story sparked change in subtle, enduring ways. Hiring practices shifted. Universities began to look closer at untapped potential within their own walls. Educational programs expanded to reach those traditionally overlooked. Conversations about gatekeeping in science and elitism in academia gained new traction. In coffee shops, classrooms, and research labs, his name became shorthand for the belief that brilliance knows no social boundaries. But Marcus, he simply carried on. Even after completing his degree, he chose to stay at the university, not for status, but for the quiet joy of learning and contributing, often from the sidelines. You might still see him there, wiping down a whiteboard after class, adjusting a chair before a lecture, lost in thought over a complex research paper during his lunch break. And if you ever hear him ask a question, listen carefully, because, as history has shown, when Marcus Bell speaks his second sentence, the world tends to fall silent, and assumptions, once again, crumble. The story of Marcus Bell, the janitor, who silenced a lecture hall with his brilliance, became more than campus folklore. It evolved into a global conversation. Major news outlets picked up the story. Headlines ranged from the janitor who outsmarted the experts to redefining intelligence, how Marcus Bell changed academia. Social media exploded with reactions. Some celebrated him as a modern-day underdog, others questioned how someone so capable had been overlooked for so long. But beyond the sensational headlines lay a deeper, uncomfortable truth. Marcus Bell's story wasn't an isolated incident, it was a mirror reflecting society's quiet bias, the unconscious hierarchies we construct daily in classrooms. In offices, on factory floors, we make silent judgments. We categorize people based on superficial details, clothing, speech patterns, job titles, and decide, often without realizing who deserves to be heard. Marcus shattered that illusion. His quiet presence, his unexpected expertise, exposed how easily brilliance can be hidden beneath assumptions. And perhaps that's why his story resonated so deeply. It wasn't just about quantum physics. It wasn't even about academia. It was about every moment, in every walk of life, where someone underestimated speaks and reminds the world that intelligence, curiosity, and insight were many disguises. Back at the university, the story triggered more than conversation. Policies were quietly reevaluated. A task force formed to explore ways to identify and nurture hidden talent within overlooked communities. Workshops were launched to train faculty and staff to recognize unconscious biases. Students, inspired by Marcus's humility and persistence, organized forums on inclusivity, not out of obligation, but fueled by a newfound awareness that potential isn't confined to resumes or formal credentials. The university, once content with tradition, was forced to confront its blind spots. Marcus, however, remained largely untouched by the whirlwind of attention. While journalists clamored for interviews and talk shows offered guest spots, he declined most invitations. Fame, after all, had never been his pursuit. His joy was rooted in quiet exploration, the thrill of understanding complex problems, the satisfaction of connecting dots that others overlooked. He continued working part-time as a janitor, a choice that confused some, but, to those who truly understood him, made perfect sense. To Marcus's, cleaning lecture halls wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity to remain close to the world of ideas he cherished. He didn't see himself as separate from the students or professors. In his eyes, they were all part of the same ecosystem of learning, regardless of titles or roles. The mop and broom were no more defining than a lab coat or a chalkboard. It was this mindset that kept him approachable, relatable, and, above all, authentic. While others debated his place in academic circles, Marcus quietly attended lectures, contributed to research discussions, and continued pursuing knowledge for its own sake. In time, his name began to fade from headlines, but not from memory. Professors frequently referenced the Marcus Bell incident in their lectures not as a cautionary tale, but as an enduring reminder of humility. It became common for students to pause before making assumptions about a classmate, a staff member, or even a stranger in the hallway. And gradually, the campus culture shifted. The invisible barriers that had once separated academic minds from support staff grew thinner. Conversations that once seemed unlikely began to happen more often in hallways, cafeterias, and libraries. Curiosity replaced condescension. But Marcus's impact wasn't confined to the university. His story rippled far beyond its walls, reaching industries and institutions that had long operated on rigid hierarchies. In tech companies, where innovation thrives on unconventional thinking, leaders began reassessing hiring practices. Stories circulated of engineers without formal degrees, of janitors with coding skills, of warehouse workers contributing breakthrough ideas. In the medical field, hospitals explored programs to identify and nurture untapped talent among their non-clinical staff. In the world of science, where egos often clash and status dictates whose voice is heard, quiet conversations began about broadening access and dismantling elitism. For Marcus, however, the fame remained secondary to his quiet mission. He had always believed that knowledge, when hoarded, loses its value. Shared knowledge, on the other hand, is transformational. And so, he began mentoring, quietly guiding young people who, like him, had been overlooked or underestimated. Some were students juggling multiple jobs, others were custodians, cafeteria workers, or part-time employees with dreams they kept hidden for fear of ridicule. To them, Marcus wasn't just a symbol of possibility. He was living proof that intellect and potential are not defined by circumstances, but by curiosity, perseverance, and self-belief. In their late-night study sessions and quiet discussions, Marcus shared more than scientific theories. He taught resilience, the strength to pursue understanding even when the world doubts you. He taught humility, the grace to acknowledge what you don't know, and the courage to ask questions anyway. And above all, he taught them to never let appearances, their own or others, dictate what they believed possible. Over time, Marcus's mentees began to thrive. Some pursued degrees they had once deemed out of reach. Others contributed innovative ideas within their current roles, transforming workplaces in subtle but powerful ways. Their success wasn't measured by titles or accolades, but by the quiet dismantling of invisible barriers, the unspoken limitations society had placed upon them. And slowly, as more stories like Marcus's emerged, the narrative around intelligence and opportunity began to evolve. Universities, corporations, and even government agencies took note. Policy shifted. Educational access expanded. Initiatives designed to empower overlooked individuals gained momentum. But perhaps the most profound change was cultural growing awareness that brilliance does not always arrive dressed in expectation. That wisdom, insight, and potential often walk among us unrecognized, until curiosity and humility create space for them to be seen. And yet, amidst these systemic changes, Marcus remained unchanged in his core beliefs. He still valued the quiet moments spent reading in the library over public recognition. He still found joy in simple conversations about complex ideas. The mop and bucket remained symbols, not of status, but of his refusal to abandon humility. Even as the world celebrated his intellect, Marcus held fast to the principle that knowledge, stripped of ego, is the most powerful force for change. Today, if you walk the halls of that university, you may still spot Marcus, not in the front of lecture halls or on magazine covers, but quietly perhaps adjusting a chair before class or lost in thought, deciphering a dense research paper during a lunch break. His presence serves as a constant reminder that greatness isn't always loud, that true impact doesn't require applause or titles. It often happens quietly, in the spaces between expectation and realization. The legend of the janitor who silenced the experts remains not because of its novelty, but because it speaks to something timeless, the potential that resides in all of us, waiting patiently for curiosity to unlock it. Marcus's story is not one of rebellion, but of quiet defiance, the refusal to let circumstance define possibility. It is a story that invites each of us to look beyond the surface, to listen more closely, and to recognize that brilliance is everywhere, often hidden in plain sight. As the years pass, new students will arrive unaware of the moment that once redefined their campus. But eventually, they'll hear the story shared by professors, whispered among classmates, etched into the very culture of the university. And maybe, just maybe, when the janitor walks by, they won't see a man defined by his uniform, but a reminder that when we discard assumptions, embrace humility, and truly listen, the most unexpected voices can leave us speechless. If this story made you look at the world and the people around you just a little differently, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We share stories that remind you brilliance has no uniform and potential knows no title. And remember, the next time someone unexpected speaks up, listen carefully. You might just witness the world go silent again.